What happens when the very people you trusted to protect your home turn it into ashes? For Tom Weaver, losing his orchard to the flames wasn't the worst thing that happened. It was what came after: an HOA that ignored the rules, a fire that destroyed everything, and a community that had to rebuild from the ground up. But in the ashes, Tom discovered something more valuable than any crop: the power to fight back, rebuild, and grow stronger together. The air in Brookside Valley, Arizona had a strange weight that week. It wasn't just dry, it felt charged, like the world was holding its breath. The sun hung above the desert hills like a dull coin, and every gust of wind carried dust that scraped across the skin. The grass around the sidewalks had lost its color weeks ago, fading from green to brittle tan. When I walked across my yard, each step crackled like crumpling paper. Everyone in town knew what that meant: fire season. The county had already declared a level 5 fire ban. That meant no campfires, no fire pits, not even backyard barbecues. I'd seen summers like this before, but this one felt worse, hotter, tighter, like the air itself wanted to spark. I'm Tom Weaver, a middle school science teacher at Brookside Valley Junior High. I teach my students about chemistry, weather, and how tiny mistakes can turn into big disasters. Sometimes I wish the adults in this town would take my lessons as seriously as the kids do. My house sits on the far eastern edge of Brookside Estates, a neighborhood that looks perfect on the outside: fresh paint, neat driveways, and mailbox flags that all match the color code the Homeowners Association decided on 2 years ago. Behind my backyard fence, the land opens into my favorite place in the world: a small apple orchard that's been in my wife's family for 3 generations. Her grandfather planted the first trees in the 1950s. He used to tell stories about hauling buckets of water by hand because irrigation lines didn't reach that far back then. When he passed, he left the orchard to his daughter, my wife, Claire. Now it's ours to protect. We've spent every season tending to those trees. I prune the branches in the spring, Claire checks for pests in the summer, and our daughter Lily helps harvest each fall. The orchard smells like home, like warm earth and sunlight on fruit skins. Sometimes, after grading papers, I sit under the biggest tree and listen to the wind. It's the quietest sound I know. That's why, when I heard metal clanging one afternoon, I looked up right away. The sound didn't belong out there. Through the gaps in the fence, I saw 3 people in orange safety vests rolling metal barrels toward the edge of my property. A pickup truck sat nearby, its tailgate open and stacked with propane tanks. The side of the truck had the HOA logo painted on it: Brookside Estates Beautification Project. At first I thought maybe they were setting up some kind of maintenance project, maybe cutting weeds or fixing irrigation. But then one of them pried open the barrel lid and pulled out what looked like a fuel hose. My stomach tightened. I stepped onto the porch and called out, "Hey, what's going on?" The woman who looked like she was in charge turned toward me. She was tall with sharp sunglasses and the kind of smile that looks polite until you realize it's rehearsed. I recognized her from the HOA meetings. Janet Miller, the new board president. "Good afternoon, Mr. Weaver," she called cheerfully, waving her clipboard. "Just some routine maintenance, clearing brush before the summer peak." I walked closer, keeping my voice calm. "Maintenance? With propane tanks?" She lowered her clipboard slightly but didn't stop smiling. "Controlled burn, perfectly safe. We've got approval." My heart dropped. "You can't be serious. There's a countywide fire ban in effect. No open flames, not even controlled ones." Janet's smile tightened like a rubber band. "We have permission," she repeated, though she didn't look so sure now. I held up my phone. From who? The fire marshal? Because I just checked the county website this morning. All burn permits are canceled until further notice. She pushed her sunglasses higher. "We'll double-check our paperwork." "Double-check it fast," I said quietly. "You're standing 50 feet from my orchard." Behind her, one of the workers, a young guy wearing headphones, started to drag a hose toward a patch of tall grass. Janet turned and waved her arm sharply. "Hold on, let's pause here," she said to them, then faced me again. "We'll confirm before we proceed." "Good idea," I said. "You should also confirm with the county before someone loses their property or their life." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the dry wind whipping between us. Then she turned away, muttering something I couldn't hear. I stood there a minute longer, the sun pressing on my back, and felt a cold twist of unease in my stomach. I'd seen enough science lab fires to know how little it takes. A spark, a breath of wind, and suddenly everything's gone. When I went back inside, Claire was at the kitchen window watching. "What were they doing?" she asked. "Something stupid," I said with a half smile. "They're planning to burn brush near the fence." Her eyes widened. "They can't. The ban." "I told them," I said, washing my hands even though they weren't dirty. "But I don't think they care." That night after dinner, I sat at the computer and typed up an email to the HOA board. I kept it professional. No anger, just facts. Subject: urgent, fire ban violation concern. Message: this afternoon, I observed HOA maintenance staff moving burn barrels and propane equipment near the east property line. As you know, the county's Level 5 fire ban prohibits all open burning. Please confirm this activity will be halted immediately. Tom Weaver. I attached a screenshot of the county's alert and hit send. Then I copied the message to the county fire department just in case. After that, I went outside one more time. The sky was clear, no stars, just a thin layer of heat haze above the desert. My orchard stood silent, the branches black against the dim glow of porch lights. I could still smell faint traces of fuel in the air. Lily came out in her pajamas and stood beside me. "Dad, what's wrong?" Just grown-ups doing dumb things," I said with a half smile. She looked at the orchard and then at me. "Grandpa always said fire makes things grow stronger." "Maybe," I said softly, "but not when it's someone else's fire." She leaned against me and we watched the wind ripple through the apple leaves. A single dry leaf snapped off a branch and tumbled to the ground. I stared at it longer than I should have. Something deep inside whispered that this wasn't over, that the air's heaviness, the stillness, the nervous energy all meant something was waiting to happen. When we went back inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke again, though I couldn't see where it came from. That night I dreamed of sparks, tiny, bright, careless, and a wall of flame racing across the orchard like a living thing. When I woke, my pillow was damp with sweat, and somewhere in the dark, a metal clang echoed faintly from the direction of the fence. I told myself it was just the wind, but I didn't believe it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The air outside was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, half asleep, when something dark caught my eye near the fence line. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I walked closer, my heart sunk. There were black scorch marks running through the tall, dry grass, uneven, thin, and curling like fingerprints burned into the earth. The smell hit next. Not just smoke, charred plastic. I knelt down and touched the edge of the burn. The soil was still warm. The fire hadn't happened days ago. It was recent, maybe last night. My first thought wasn't panic. It was disbelief. After everything I'd told them, after the county ban, the warnings, the emails, they had gone ahead and burned anyway. I grabbed my phone, snapping photos from every angle. The black streaks, the melted drip from a hose line, and the edge of my orchard just feet away from where the flames had stopped. If the wind had shifted just slightly, those marks would have led straight to my trees. Inside, Claire was making breakfast. "You're up early," she said, smiling faintly. "Coffee's still hot." I held up my phone. "Look." Her face fell when she saw the pictures. "Oh no." "Yeah," I said quietly. "They burned last night, right next to the fence." She put her hand over her mouth. "Tom, that's insane. You told them." "I did," I said, typing quickly, "and I'm telling them again." This time my email wasn't as polite. Subject: urgent, unlawful burning on HOA property. Message: this morning I discovered multiple burn marks and melted plastic near the eastern property boundary. These are direct violations of the county fire ban currently in effect.
Place. Please confirm immediately who authorized this. Tom Weaver. Then I attached the photos and sent copies to the county fire department and the HOA's main office. By lunchtime, no one had responded. Not a call, not a text, not even a "we'll look into it." That silence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't carelessness, it was arrogance. The HOA board thought they were untouchable, that their rules mattered more than the county's. That afternoon, the temperature spiked to 103 degrees. The air shimmered above the asphalt, and the wind that used to bring a little relief now felt like someone aiming a hairdryer at your face. The news said the heat wave could last another week. By evening, the sky had turned hazy, the kind of orange haze that makes everything look like it's under a film of smoke. I could see the sun setting behind the desert ridge, but it looked blurred and tired. Lily followed me out to the orchard with her water bottle. "It's so hot," she said, wiping sweat off her forehead. "The air feels weird." "Yeah," I said, turning on the hose. "The humidity's gone. Be careful near the fence." She knelt by one of the smaller trees and started watering around its roots. She was careful, always careful. "Dad," she said quietly, "what if the fire spreads?" I looked at her. She was only 14, but she noticed everything. "It won't," I said. My voice sounded steady, but even I could hear the lie in it. She didn't say anything else, but the way she looked at the trees, like she was memorizing them, made something twist inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of those burn marks. Every creak in the house sounded like a spark. Around midnight, I went out back with a flashlight. The orchard looked peaceful in the dark, but the smell, faint smoke and something chemical, still hung in the air. I checked the irrigation lines, ran my fingers through the soil. Dry. Too dry. When I finally went inside, I left the window open just a little. I wanted to hear if anything changed out there. 3 days passed, and things got worse. The heat built like pressure in a sealed jar. The local weather station said the wind would shift soon, coming down from the high desert. Around here, everyone knew what that meant. Wildfire weather. On Saturday, the sky looked bruised. A faint gray layer stretched across the horizon, almost invisible unless you looked straight at it. I stood on the porch, hands on my hips, trying to convince myself it was just dust. Claire came out with her phone. "Did you see this?" she asked, showing me a neighborhood message board post. It was from Janet, the HOA president. "Thanks to our dedicated maintenance team for keeping Brookside beautiful. Controlled burn completed safely earlier this week. No risk to homes." I felt my chest tighten. Controlled burn? They were bragging about it, lying about it, as if setting fire during a county ban was something to be proud of. "Unbelievable," I muttered. Claire frowned. "Do you think the county knows?" "They will." I picked up my phone again, called the fire department, and left another message. Calm but firm. "This is Tom Weaver from Brookside Estates. Unauthorized burning continues despite the ban. The HOA is calling it a controlled burn. I have photographic evidence. Please send someone before this gets worse." When I hung up, the voicemail timer read 1 minute and 47 seconds. I had said everything I could. By Sunday afternoon, the wind changed. It started as a slow whisper, brushing through the apple branches. Then it grew steady and hard, blowing from the south instead of the west. I could feel it in my bones. The same kind of wind I remembered from my college firefighting internship years ago. That was when I smelt it. Not wood smoke this time. Melted plastic, mixed with something sour and sharp. The kind of smell that tells you something synthetic is burning. I stepped onto the porch, my stomach turning. The horizon didn't look right. A faint orange glow flickered beyond the ridge, thin but growing. At first I hoped it was just the sunset breaking through haze, but then the glow moved. It didn't fade, it spread. "Claire!" I shouted, rushing back inside. "Call Lily now!" She came running from the hallway, phone already in her hand. "What's happening?" "Smoke, South Ridge. It's coming this way." Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her backpack. "Dad, it smells like something's burning." I didn't want to scare her, but my voice came out sharp. "Get your shoes, honey, now." I ran out to the yard again, the dry wind stinging my eyes. The orange glow had grown brighter, crawling down the ridge like a slow-moving wave. The orchard rustled, not from the breeze, but from the heat rising ahead of the fire. For a split second, the world was silent. Then came the sound, the deep rolling crackle of fire moving fast. I froze. Every instinct I had screamed run, but part of me couldn't look away. The fire wasn't just light, it was alive. It danced through the brush, skipping low and fast, glowing like lava veins through the darkness. And it was coming straight for us. It happened faster than any of us could react. One moment the night was still. The next, the horizon behind our orchard exploded in orange light. The fire rolled down the ridge like a beast finally set free. Dry grass, brittle shrubs, and old fence posts all turned into kindle in seconds. "Claire!" I shouted, running toward the yard. "Get the emergency kit! Lily, grab the car keys!" The air changed. Heavy, hot, filled with floating ash that looked like snow made of sparks. Each breath burned going in. By the time I reached the fence, the first flames were already crawling through the weeds behind the orchard. They didn't move like campfire flames. These were fast, snapping, leaping, hunting. I turned on the garden hose and aimed it at the edge of the orchard, but instead of a strong stream, it came out in a sad trickle, sprang only a few feet. I twisted the nozzle, slammed the valve, even checked the spigot. Nothing helped. The pressure was useless. Then it hit me. The HOA had reduced water flow last month to save on maintenance costs. "Dad, we have to go!" Lily screamed from the porch. Her voice cracked, scared and small. I ignored it and ran forward anyway, dragging the hose, trying to save something. The fire had reached the first apple tree. I could hear it, this awful, tearing sound, like fabric being ripped apart. The leaves burst into flame one after another, and the trunk hissed as sap boiled inside. I sprayed water, but it turned to steam before it even hit the bark. "Come on!" I shouted at the hose, as if yelling could change physics. Behind me, Claire's voice trembled. "Tom, we have to go, now!" "I can stop it!" I yelled back, even though I knew I couldn't. The orchard was glowing now, each row of trees flickering like torches in the dark. My 20 years of work, my family's heritage, it all stood surrounded by fire. The air was filled with the sound of cracking wood and falling branches. The smoke grew thicker, curling into gray walls that made it hard to see. Sparks drifted through the air, stinging my skin when they landed. My eyes watered, but I didn't back down. I kept spraying, coughing, sweating, shaking. Then Lily appeared beside me. She had her arm over her mouth, eyes wide. "Dad, you can't stop it. Please!" Her voice broke something in me. I dropped the hose. The sound of it hitting the dirt was drowned by the roar of the fire as it jumped to the next row of trees. We ran. By the time we reached the porch, the whole orchard was burning. From the deck, I could see rows of fire stretching all the way to the far fence, the flames bending sideways in the wind. The air shimmered like glass. We climbed into the car, but the road was already blocked by smoke and embers. I could barely see past the hood. "Back inside," I said. "The house has sprinklers. It's safer." We slammed the doors and ran in. I hit the emergency sprinkler switch I'd installed years ago when I was still volunteering at the fire department. Water rained from the gutters around the roof, creating a thin shield of steam against the oncoming flames. The power flickered twice, then died. The only light came from the windows, orange and gold, flashing like lightning that wouldn't stop. Lily was crying now. "Dad, the trees!" "I know," I said, though my throat was so dry the words barely came out. "I know." I pressed my hand against the window. Outside, the fire had reached the irrigation shed. The metal roof glowed red before it collapsed inward with a crash. Sparks flew like fireworks, and the wind carried them toward the deck. For a moment, I thought the fire would take the house, too. But then the sprinkler system kicked in harder, hissing and sputtering, soaking the siding. The flames slowed near the lawn, curling back where the grass was still damp. I don't know how long we stood there. Minutes, maybe hours.
The fire sounded like a freight train rumbling past, a constant low roar mixed with the sharp pop of exploding branches. Every so often, we'd hear another tree fall with a deep thud, shaking the ground. Finally, sometime past midnight, the sound began to fade. The orange outside dimmed to a dull glow. The smoke thickened but moved slower, heavier, no longer pushed by wind. When it was finally quiet, I opened the back door. The air was still hot enough to sting my face. I stepped outside slowly, boots crunching on ash. The orchard, our orchard, was gone. All that remained were black stumps and glowing embers. The ground that used to smell like earth and apples now smelled like death, burnt wood and melted plastic. The irrigation pipes had twisted into strange curving shapes. The fence had collapsed in several places. I walked forward in disbelief. 20 years of work, gone in one night. I reached down and picked up a half-burned apple. It was still warm, half melted into the dirt. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I didn't realize I was crying until Lily's small hand slipped into mine. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. "It's not your fault, honey." She looked at the field, her eyes reflecting the glow of tiny flames still eating at the roots. "Grandpa's trees," she said quietly. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaking. "Grandpa's trees." We stood there together, watching the last pieces of our orchard crumble. By dawn, firefighters had arrived to contain the last of the flames. One of them, a young guy in a yellow jacket, walked over and said, "You're lucky, sir. The house made it." "Yeah," I said flatly, looking past him at the ruin. "Lucky." He glanced toward the scorched field and shook his head. "Wind caught you bad. These fires move fast." "Wasn't the wind. It was negligence." He frowned but didn't ask. He just patted my shoulder and walked off. When the sun finally rose, everything looked wrong. The world was gray and hollow. The orchard, once green and alive, was nothing but ash and silence. The air was thick with soot that glittered faintly in the morning light, like snow that didn't melt. Claire brought out a blanket and wrapped it around Lily. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I stood at the edge of the orchard, the charred remains stretching out before me, and felt something break inside. I had thought the orchard was part of me, an extension of my life, my work, my family story. Now it was gone, erased in one night by the carelessness of people who thought rules were optional. That night, our house stood, blackened on one side but still standing. The walls smelled of smoke and the air vents blew out ashes, but we had a roof. Still, when I looked out the window, all I could see was loss. I told myself that maybe with time I'd rebuild, that this was the end of one chapter and the start of another. But I was wrong. The fire was only the beginning. The morning after the fire, the house smelled like smoke and heartbreak. Ash drifted through the air like gray snow, settling on the porch and windowsills. When I stepped outside, the orchard looked like a graveyard, just black stumps poking out of white dust. The air was heavy, quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. Claire sat on the steps, holding her coffee with both hands, eyes empty. Lily was inside trying to pack up photo albums that hadn't even been touched by flames. I could tell she just wanted to do something, anything that made her feel like we hadn't lost it all. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there staring at what used to be my life. That's when the mail carrier showed up. He slowed as he reached my driveway, his uniform dusted with ash like he'd walked through a storm. "Morning, Mr. Weaver," he said softly, handing me a small stack of envelopes. "Morning," I muttered, barely glancing up. He hesitated, then pointed to the top envelope. "That one's from the HOA. Looks official." My stomach tightened. I tore it right there on the porch. The first line hit like a punch. "Notice of violation. Brookside Estates Homeowners Association. This notice is to inform you that your property at 144 East Orchard Lane is in violation of community fire safety standards, including failure to maintain a proper fire barrier. This negligence may have contributed to the spread of the recent brush fire that damaged HOA-maintained property. I froze. My hand started shaking so hard the paper rattled. They're blaming me, I said aloud, though no one had asked. Claire looked up slowly. What? I'm blaming me, I shouted, waving the letter. She stood and reached for the letter, but I pulled it back. No, I said, pacing across the porch. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, not from the fire, but from anger that burned hotter than anything outside. That orchard had been my family's history. I'd given them warnings, sent emails, filed complaints, and they ignored it all. Now they had the nerve to fine me for it? That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't just going to be the quiet guy at the edge of town who let the HOA push me around anymore. By noon, I was parked outside the HOA office, a squat, fake stone building at the center of Brookside Estates that looked more like a dentist's office than a place that ruined lives. The sign on the door read, Brookside Estates Community Management, Excellence Through Order. The irony almost made me laugh. I pushed the door open so hard the little bell above it clanged against the frame. A young woman behind the counter looked up from her computer. She blinked, startled. Can I help you, sir? I need to speak with Janet Miller. I said. My voice came out calm, but every muscle in my body was tight. She's in a meeting. Then tell her Tom Weaver's here. She'll make time. The receptionist swallowed hard, picked up the phone, and whispered into the receiver. Then she nodded toward the waiting chairs. She'll be right out. I didn't sit. 5 minutes later, Janet appeared, wearing her usual red blouse and that same fake politician smile. She held her clipboard like a shield. Tom, she said, tilting her head like I was a misbehaving student, let's try to stay calm. No, I interrupted, stepping closer. You broke the law, and you know it. Her smile faltered. Now, I understand you're upset. Upset? I laughed bitterly. Your people burned down my orchard. I warned you. I sent proof. I begged you not to light anything during a fire ban, and you did it anyway. She shifted uncomfortably, but kept her voice even. The board followed procedure. Our maintenance team... Stop, I said sharply. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. You see this? These are photos I took the morning before the fire. Scorch marks, melted hose lines, barrels near the property line. You want more? I've got drone footage from my neighbor. It shows your staff lighting fires during a fire ban. Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. You can't prove intent, she said weakly. I can prove negligence, I shot back. For a moment, silence filled the room except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Behind the counter, the receptionist pretended to type, but I could tell she was listening. Janet's voice finally broke the quiet. Tom, this isn't the place. We'll have to review. Don't bother, I said. You've reviewed enough already. I placed a violation notice on her clipboard. Here's your mistake in writing. She reached for it, but I pulled it back, folded it once, and slid it into my jacket pocket. Actually, I said, I think I'll keep this for evidence. Janet's face went pale. She turned without another word and walked into her office, closing the door behind her. That told me everything. Back home, I set up my laptop at the dining table and started gathering everything. Every email, photo, timestamp, and file from the last month. I organized them into folders labeled Fire Ban Notices, HOA Correspondence, and Evidence. Claire sat across from me. What are you doing? I'm building a case, I said without looking up. Against the HOA? Yes. She hesitated. Tom, this could get messy. They have lawyers, insurance. So do I said, pointing at the screen. Me, right here. This is enough to make them answer for what they did. She watched me for a moment, then nodded. Then do it right. Don't just get angry. Get even smart. Her words steadied me. That night, I drafted a formal complaint addressed to the county fire marshal's office, attaching every piece of evidence I had. I included photos of the barrels, the burned grass, the violation letter, and even screenshots of the HOA's post bragging about their controlled burn. When I finished, I hit send. The screen blinked once, confirming submission. For the first time in days, I exhaled. But then I noticed something out the window. 2 black SUVs slowly cruising past the house. They didn't stop, they didn't speed, just rolled by, their tinted windows reflecting the firelight from the street lamps. Claire came to the door behind me. "Tom," "Probably nothing," I said, though the back of my neck tingled. She didn't believe me, and neither did I. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room, staring out at the dark field where the orchard used to be. The wind had died down, but a faint column of smoke still rose from the far hedge. I could almost hear the trees, like whispers fading into the night. The HOA thought they could scare me into silence, but they didn't understand something about me. I'd spent my whole life teaching kids about cause and effect. And this time, the cause was theirs. The effect? That was just getting started. The morning after I sent my complaint, I didn't expect much. I'd dealt with county offices before. Slow emails, polite apologies, and no results. But this time felt different. By noon, my phone buzzed with the familiar name. Ryan Holt, County Fire Department. I hadn't talked to Ryan in years, not since he transferred from the city to the county. We used to volunteer together on community fire prevention projects back when my orchard was thriving. He'd been the one who taught me how to read burn patterns and spot illegal ignitions. "Tom," his voice crackled over the speaker, "I read your email. You home right now?" "Yeah." "Good. Don't touch anything near the burn line. I'm on my way." He showed up less than an hour later in his dusty county truck wearing his yellow field jacket and that same serious expression he always had when something wasn't right. We walked to the fence line where the orchard began, or what was left of it. Ryan crouched down, brushing his gloved fingers through the gray ash. "See this?" he said, pointing to a dark, oily patch near the edge. I nodded. "Fuel residue." "Exactly. Diesel. You don't get that from brush fires. That comes from accelerant use, usually to start fires fast." He followed the burn trail with his eyes. "And these lines? Too even. Maintenance burns never look like this. They were trying to clear a strip, probably to beautify the property edge." "So it wasn't just an accident?" I asked. Ryan looked up at me. "No, Tom, this wasn't maintenance. This was illegal burning." My throat tightened. "You think the HOA is responsible?" He nodded slowly. "Without a doubt. And you've got proof." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Photos, emails, copies of the county fire ban notice, and even screenshots of the HOA's post bragging about their controlled burn. Ryan flipped through each page, his jaw tightening as he went. "This is solid," he said. "You've done half our job already." The next morning, the county investigators arrived. 3 of them, wearing high-visibility vests and helmets marked Fire Investigation Unit. They unloaded toolkits, cameras, and evidence bags. Janet and 2 HOA board members stood near the office's edge of the property, pretending to look cooperative but clearly uncomfortable. One investigator approached them. "We'll need unrestricted access to all areas affected by the fire." "This is private property," Janet replied quickly. "We'll have to check with our legal counsel first." "Once fire crosses private property lines, ma'am, it's public investigation territory. You can either cooperate or we'll get a warrant." Janet's face lost all color. She stepped aside. From my yard, I watched as the team began marking the burn zone with orange spray paint, tracing the path where the fire had jumped from HOA land into my orchard. They measured scorch depth, tested ash for accelerants, and even used drones to map the spread pattern. One of them pointed to a spot near the barrels the HOA had left behind. "There's your origin point," he said to Ryan. Ryan nodded grimly. "That's what I thought." They took samples from the melted barrel edges and the soil beneath them. Every few minutes, one of them snapped the photo or wrote notes on a clipboard. It felt like watching detectives at a crime scene, because, really, that's what it was. By the end of the second day, news trucks started showing up. A white van with a blue Channel 8 News logo parked across from my house. Then another, KTVA Local 6. Reporters with microphones stood on the curb, talking into cameras while my burned orchard smoked behind them. Claire looked out the window, nervous. "Tom, Are we really ready for this? No, I said, but the truth is... A reporter caught me stepping off the porch. Mr. Weaver, we heard the fire started from HOA property. Can you confirm that? I hesitated, then said, I can confirm that I warned them multiple times and they ignored every warning. Do you believe they violated county law? She asked. I don't believe it, I said. I know it. That soundbite made the 6 o'clock news. By the end of the week, every grocery store checkout line in town had newspapers with bold headlines. HOA ignored fire ban, started blaze that destroyed local orchard. The article showed a photo of me standing at the fence, the burned trees stretching out behind me. My name was in print, my story laid out for everyone to see. Some of my neighbors started showing up at the house, people I barely knew before. A man from 2 streets over dropped off bottled water and said quietly, about time someone stood up to them. A retired couple from down the block brought a casserole and whispered, they fined us last year for leaving a ladder out. We wanted to fight back, but we were scared. Even strangers left notes on our porch, handwritten messages that said things like, stay strong, and they can't hide this anymore. But not everyone was supportive. One morning, I found a folded paper tucked under my windshield. You're tearing the community apart. Let it go. No name, no signature. I kept it, of course. More evidence. Meanwhile, the HOA board tried to do damage control. Janet posted a long message on the neighborhood app. The HOA is cooperating fully with authorities. We regret the unfortunate spread of a routine maintenance burn, which may have been influenced by unpredictable weather conditions. All proper procedures were followed. When I read that line, I laughed out loud. Sharp, bitter, humorless. Proper procedures? They hadn't even filed for a permit. I printed the post and pinned it to my growing corkboard of documents in the living room. It sat right beside my photos of the burned barrels and the official county ban notice. Claire walked by and stared at the board. Looks like a detective movie in here, she said softly. Good, I replied, because that's exactly what it's going to take to bring them down. 2 days later, Ryan called again. Tom, thought you'd want to hear this from me before it hits the news. What is it? The lab confirmed accelerant residue, diesel, just like we suspected. There's no permit on record, no notice of burn activity filed with the county. The HOA is in deep trouble. For the first time since the fire, I felt something close to relief. Not happiness, just the satisfaction of finally being heard. Thanks, Ryan, I said. You did good, Tom. Most people would have given up. I looked out at the empty orchard, the sun setting behind the hills, painting the ash silver. I said, giving up's not an option when you've already lost everything. That night, the neighborhood was alive with gossip. Lights glowed in every window, people stood in driveways whispering. Some were angry at the HOA. Others just wanted to know what would happen next. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Brookside Valley wasn't silent anymore. The truth was spreading. Like fire. For a few days, Brookside Valley was strangely peaceful. The sky cleared, the ashes settled, and the smell of smoke faded from the air. Fire crews had finished their investigation and packed up their gear. Even the reporters had moved on to the next big story. It almost felt like calm. Almost. But nature doesn't forget. It just waits. That Friday morning, the wind changed again. At first, it was just a whisper, the kind of warm breeze that barely moves the leaves. But by afternoon, it grew into something stronger, wilder. I stood on the ridge above what used to be my orchard, feeling it rush past my face. The air was hot, dry, electric. Below me, the blackened earth shimmered like glass. Ash and dust swirled around my boots. The orchard skeleton, rows of black stumps, stood like gravestones under the sun. Then I smelt it. Not new smoke, old smoke. The kind that hides deep underground, waiting for the right gust of air to wake it up again. I frowned and stepped closer to one of the stumps. A thin trail of heat shimmered up from the ground. When I kicked at the ash, a faint orange glow pulsed beneath it, like a dying heart suddenly taking a breath. Not again, I whispered. I reached into my pocket and called Ryan. He picked up after one ring. Ryan, it's Tom. I'm up by the ridge. I think some of the old embers... Before I could finish, the wind roared hard enough to steal the rest of my words. The glow under the ground flared bright, then ignited. A spark leapt from one stump to the next. Within seconds, the orchard floor came alive again, thin orange lines crawling through the ash like veins of fire. Ryan, I shouted into the phone, the wind's reversed. His voice came sharp through the static. Get out of there, Tom. It's headed straight for the development. I backed away, watching as the flames caught the dry brush beyond the fence line. This time, they didn't turn toward my house. The wind pushed them uphill, toward the neighborhood. The very same one that had ignored every warning just weeks earlier. I climbed higher on the ridge for a better view. From up there, I could see the entire layout of Brookside Estates. The neat rows of beige houses to trim the lawns, the fake stone HOA office sitting proudly in the center. And between it all, the fire raced forward, fast and unstoppable. I ran to the truck and grabbed my binoculars. Through the lenses, I could see people running from their garages waving garden hoses like magic wands that could somehow hold back nature. They looked just like I had the night my orchard burned. Desperate, helpless, terrified. The irony hit me hard. The same board that had ignored my warnings, the same neighbors who stayed silent when my orchard turned to ash, were now watching their own world go up in flames. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. Nature didn't care about HOA rules or property lines. It didn't care about fines or letters or excuses. It simply followed the wind.
Down below, chaos took over. The HOA's maintenance crew, those same guys who'd once rolled in barrels and propane tanks, were now dragging hoses from hydrants, shouting over the roar of fire. Someone backed a golf cart out of the garage, loaded with fire extinguishers. It was almost absurd, watching them fight something so much bigger than themselves. Sirens wailed in the distance. The fire department was on the move again. But the flames were already licking at fences and rooftops before the first engine even arrived. I saw Janet, the HOA president, standing in the middle of the street with her clipboard clutched against her chest like it could protect her. She was shouting orders to no one in particular, spinning in circles as embers rained around her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Ryan's truck came barreling up the hill behind me, tires kicking dust. He jumped out and ran toward the ridge. "Where's the source?" he yelled over the wind. "Right below us. The embers reignited in the orchard and the wind flipped." He stared at the flames spreading across the neighborhood and swore under his breath. "That's all it takes. One gust, one ember. This valley's a fire trap." "Can they stop it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not with this wind. Best they can do is evacuate." We stood there together, watching the fire tear through the upper streets. Smoke rolled over the rooftops like a living wave, turning the late afternoon sky into a red haze. The sound was deafening, like hundreds of flags whipping in a storm. Down below, cars pulled out of driveways in long lines, some packed with pets and boxes, others were left behind, their owners already on foot. Ryan touched my shoulder. "You should go, Tom. This isn't safe." "I'm not leaving," I said quietly. "Not yet." He didn't argue, he just nodded once and ran back toward his truck, radioing for backup. I stayed on the ridge, the heat pressing against my face like an open oven door. The flames reached the HOA office next. The fake stone facade glowed red, then cracked under the heat. Within minutes, the roof caved in, sending sparks flying high into the air. The famed place where they had handed me fines and lies was now nothing more than burning rubble. The wind howled, carrying ashes uphill and scattering them like gray snow. One of the signs near the office, Brookside Estates, Excellence Through Order, caught fire and collapsed, letters melting one by one. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It wasn't happiness either. It was silence. The kind that follows when the truth finally speaks for itself. By evening, the fire crews had arrived in full force. Water trucks lined the streets, firefighters shouting commands and spraying foam along the perimeter. Helicopters dropped water from above,
the rotors chopping through thick clouds of smoke. From my vantage point, I could see the flames slowly losing their strength. The main blaze began to die as night fell, leaving behind glowing ruins and small smoldering pockets that looked like stars scattered across the ground. The HOA office was gone. 3 houses near it were badly damaged. No one was hurt, but the damage was undeniable. The same county investigators who had been here days earlier would be back tomorrow, this time with an even bigger case. I took one last look at the valley, then turned to leave. Before I did, I whispered quietly to no one in particular. You should have listened. That night, standing on my porch, I could still see faint red light flickering against the horizon. Claire joined me, wrapping her arm around my waist. She asked me softly, "It reached them, didn't it?" "Yeah," I said. The wind turned. We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the faint sounds of sirens echoing through the hills. "It wasn't revenge," she said after a long pause. "No," I agreed. "It was nature answering back." That wind that night was cooler, gentler. It moved through the trees that survived, whispering across the empty field where my orchard once stood. For the first time since the fire, I felt something like peace. Not justice, just acceptance. Because some lessons aren't taught in classrooms or meetings. They're burned into the ground. The following week, the world felt different. Not just for me, but for everyone in Brookside Valley. When the smoke finally cleared, it wasn't just a fire that had burned away. It was everything the HOA stood for. The clubhouse, their pride and joy, the heart of the community, was nothing more than a twisted pile of charred wood and melted glass. The front doors that used to be polished and welcoming were now just charred remnants. It wasn't just a building that was destroyed. It was the image they had carefully crafted, the idea of a perfect, orderly neighborhood where everything had its place. The same place where my orchard had stood proudly before being wiped out by their careless actions. Around it, several board members' homes were also gone, burned to the ground or severely damaged by the flames. Janet's house, the one closest to the HOA office, was barely standing. The roof caved in and windows shattered. As much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of justice. The fire didn't care about their titles or power. It didn't care about their reputation. It just burned everything in its path. It wasn't long before the county investigators released their final report. I stood in our kitchen, Claire beside me, as I read through the document. The details were both comforting and sickening. County Fire Investigation Report. The fire that originated on the HOA's property was found to have been illegally started by HOA staff. Their actions violated the countywide fire ban issued the previous week. The spread was further exacerbated by leftover embers reigniting in high winds. No proper permits were filed for the burn and no safety protocols were followed. I let the paper drop onto the table. "Here it is," I said quietly. "They did it. They started the fire." Claire nodded slowly. "It's over. The truth is out." The investigators had also found diesel fuel residue at the burn site, confirming what Ryan and I had suspected all along. The HOA had tried to clean up their mess with quick fixes and lies, but it was too late. Their negligence had been exposed. Then, the lawsuits started coming in. It wasn't just me anymore. Other homeowners who had been affected by the fire or who had their properties damaged filed their own claims against the HOA. There were a lot of us now, and we all had one thing in common. We were done being silent. In court, things moved quickly. The HOA's lawyers tried to argue that the fire had been an accident, that it was caused by unpredictable weather patterns or by fluke circumstances, anything to avoid taking full responsibility. But the truth was right there in front of them. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge was clear in his ruling. The HOA board is found guilty of gross negligence, property destruction, and the unauthorized burn of HOA-controlled property. The damages will be compensated to all affected homeowners, and the HOA board will be dissolved immediately. When the decision was announced,
I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relief. I felt something else. A quiet finality. The board was gone. Janet, Karen, and the rest of them. Their offices cleared out. Their faces, once so confident and smug in their power, were now nowhere to be found. The fake smiles and strict rules that had controlled our neighborhood for so long were nothing but dust and ashes. It wasn't the way I imagined they would happen, but in a way it felt like the community had been freed. By the time the news van showed up again, the HOA was already on its last legs. The local channels reported on the dissolution of the board, the lawsuit victories, and the neighborhood's plans for rebuilding. One of the interviews caught me by surprise. A reporter asked me what I felt like to win.
I didn't win, I said to the camera. We won. Everyone here. Everyone who's been bullied, ignored, or fined for doing nothing wrong. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. When the broadcast aired that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry anymore. The fire had taken the orchard, yes, but it had also taken away the fear that the HOA had instilled in us all. They had made us feel powerless, as if their rules were more important than our own homes, our own land. But in the end, they were the ones who had to answer for it all. As for the orchard, the next few weeks felt like a blur of activity. I met with Ryan and a few of the other neighbors who had also been affected. We started planning. First, a fundraiser to help rebuild the homes that had been damaged. Then a meeting at the community center to discuss how to move forward without the HOA's control. It felt different this time. No one was afraid to speak up. People shared ideas freely, listened to each other. There was real community happening. But my mind kept returning to the orchard. I spent the early mornings out there, digging in the ashes, trying to make sense of the wreckage. The smell of burnt wood still hung in the air. I couldn't bring back the trees, but I could start again. Lily came out to help me one afternoon. She kneeled beside me, carefully inspecting the ground where we used to plant new trees each year. "You think we should plant new ones?" she said, her voice soft. I smiled, brushing ash off her cheek. "Yeah, I think we will. One day, when the soil's ready." She stood up and looked across the scorched land. "Maybe we could plant something else here too. Not just apples. Maybe pears or peaches. It could be a mix." "That's a good idea," I said. "We'll make it our own this time. Whatever grows, grows." It wasn't long before the county sent a check for the damages, and Brookside Estates began the long process of healing. The land began to show signs of life again, the soil softening under the warm sun. People came together to help each other rebuild. And this time, there were no fines for every little detail. The only rules now were the ones that made sense for all of us. The new neighborhood council met every month, but this time it wasn't just about maintaining perfect lawns or enforcing absurd rules. It was about making sure we had a say in what happened next. And for the first time, there was a feeling of trust in the air, something I hadn't felt in years. I couldn't get my orchard back, but I could make sure it wasn't the last thing my family had. As I looked out over the land, I saw something new. Hope. The trees would return. Slowly, yes, but they would return. And so would the community. It wasn't perfect, but we were finally working together, not divided by rules that didn't matter. The HOA had burned away the past, but it had cleared the way for something better to grow. And this time, we were ready for it. Months had passed since the fire, but the changes in Brookside Valley felt like a new season. The land, scorched and ruined by the flames, had slowly begun to heal. Green patches of grass pushed up through the ash. Small wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places, as if nature itself was refusing to be defeated. It wasn't the orchard, not yet, but it was something, a promise of new life. I stood on the ridge one morning, watching the sun rise over the hills. The air was cooler now, and the smell of smoke had long since faded. It felt like a different world, one where the past had been left behind. My thoughts wandered back to the orchard. The trees were still gone, but I didn't feel that same pain I had in the weeks after the fire. It wasn't just loss anymore, it was a reminder that no matter how hard something burns, life finds a way to return. That afternoon, Lily and I walked out to the old orchard site. She was carrying a small bucket of young peach saplings, our first step towards rebuilding. She had picked peaches, of course. She loved them, always had, ever since she was a little girl. "It's good, right?" she asked me, looking up at me as we walked across the land. I smiled, brushing ash off her cheek. "It's perfect, kiddo." We kneeled down, side by side, and began to plant the new trees. The soil had softened, and though it wasn't as rich as before, it was still good enough for a new start. Each hole we dug felt like a promise to the future. Neighbors started showing up one by one as the word spread. It was a slow process at first. Some of them were the same people who had ignored me when I first asked for help, the same people who had followed the HOA's rules blindly. But now, something had changed. They came, all of them. Even Mr. Harris, the guy who always complained about everything. "Hey, Tom," he said, wiping his brow as he dropped a spade into the dirt. "Can I help with those trees?" I laughed and handed him a sapling. "I thought you didn't like getting your hands dirty." He grinned. "Guess the orchard was the only thing worth caring about around here." We worked in silence for a while, planting rows of peach trees, one after the other. The sun was high, the air was still warm, but it didn't feel as hot as before. The community was coming together, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. By the end of the day, we had planted over 20 saplings. The small orchard began to take shape. It wasn't much, just a few rows of young trees, but it felt like the start of something big, something real. As we stood back to admire the work, I noticed Lily staring at the land where the old orchard used to be. She had never known anything else. That orchard had been there since she was born, just like it had been there for Claire and I. But now she was seeing it as a fresh start. "Dad, do you think it'll be like it was?" I paused, my hand resting on the trunk of a small tree. "I think it'll be better. It'll be better. We'll make it better." That night, the community came together for the first official gathering in the new space. The old HOA lot, now cleared of rules and regulations, had been turned into a community garden. The garden was run by volunteers, not by HOA bylaws. The rules were simple: respect the land, respect each other, and grow what you love. We laid out picnic tables under the newly planted trees, and kids set to work painting a mural on the new wooden fence that lined the garden. The colors were bright: red, yellow, blue, a splash of life where there had once been only silence. The design was simple, but meaningful. A tree with branches stretching out to the sky, its roots tangled beneath the ground. As the evening drew on, the atmosphere felt different than anything I had ever experienced in Brookside. People were laughing, talking, sharing stories. Neighbors who had once stayed in their homes avoiding each other were now chatting like old friends. It wasn't just the trees that were growing, it was the community. The kids ran around, some picking wildflowers that had already started to bloom in the garden, others climbing the fence to get a better look at the mural. Even Mr. Harris, who had always kept to himself, joined in, passing out drinks and snacks with a grin. At some point, I found myself standing alone on the edge of the lot, just watching. The land had changed. The orchard wasn't there anymore, but it wasn't just gone, it had been transformed. People were walking on the new paths we had built, stopping to chat or just enjoy the evening. The sign we put up earlier that day was now standing proudly at the entrance of the garden. It read, "From ashes, we grow again." I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Claire standing there, her arm around Lily's shoulders. She said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is." "I think we finally found our way back." "Back?" I asked, confused. "Not just to the orchard," she said, looking around at the people who were still working together, still building something good. "To us, to what matters." I smiled, looking at Lily as she and some other kids helped finish painting the mural. "I think you're right." A few weeks later, the orchard had grown even more. The trees were small, but the sight of them standing tall in neat rows felt like a fresh beginning. People came by every day to water them, to make sure they had enough sunlight and space to breathe. It wasn't just a place to visit anymore. It was part of us. Sometimes I walk along the rows at sunset when the sky is painted with orange and pink. The orchard is still young. The trees are small, but they're alive. And every time I hear the wind move through their leaves, I remember what the fire taught us all. You can't control nature with paperwork. You can't tell the land what to do or when to grow. But you can learn, rebuild, and grow stronger together. The fire may have destroyed the orchard, but in the end, it couldn't destroy what was important. The land came back, the trees came back, and we came back. Together, we had built something new, something better. And I knew deep down that the orchard would always be there, no matter what.